Check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. Sound check is good. All right. Good evening, everyone. As I echo all over the place. Y'all know I'm a struggle streamer. Those of you who are watching. All right. So good evening. Welcome back to Lean on Success, for process improvement and self-improvement. My name is Ben. I'm a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. I almost decertified myself there. Can't have that. I worked too hard for that certification. Wanted to bring you a mid-month update because it's a lot of crap going on in these economic streets. So wanted to cover all of that with you this evening. Thank you for all of you who are tuning in. As you come into the stream, please make sure that you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. It really helps me out. I'm trying desperately to get monetized. I'm a little bit over halfway there from a subscriber count standpoint. So really would appreciate all of you who are able to hit that subscribe button to help me move this thing forward, because my wife is expensive and I need the extra income to afford to continue to be married. So please hit that subscribe button if you want me to stay married. Thank you very much. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this update. We're going to start with inflation. So the inflation report came out last week, and in my last update prior to the inflation report coming out, I told you that energy was currently sitting at negative 12.5% year over year. Energy prices as of August were, as of July, that is, were 12.5% lower than they were July of the previous year. We talked about how the energy prices are going to start stabilizing over the next 6 months. That's going to push the year over year numbers higher, closer to zero or even positive, and that's going to drive CPI. And I told y'all, I'm going to remember that. I told y'all to remember that. Okay, so I hope y'all remember that, because what happened on the CPI report last week, if you saw the video last week, should have come as a surprise to absolutely none of you. CPI spiked up significantly in the month of August, 3.7% year over year. Good evening, Colonel Buckshot. So glad you could make it in. Appreciate you being here. CPI spiked up to 3.7% in August. That's up from 3.2% in July. So all of this talk and all this nonsense about the Fed saying the 2% is their goal, clearly we're going in the wrong direction. And like I told y'all with last week's report, with the live that I did last time, those energy prices, as they continue to stabilize from the Russian invasion, it's going to cause CPI to go higher, right? This is what I showed y'all last time. The Russian invasion caused oil energy prices overall to spike because there was an embargo on Russian goods. That the supply chain is now starting to stabilize from the invasion. But what we saw was that there was a sudden jump in energy costs of 5% in August. So the month over month increase or change in energy was up by 5%. This is a very significant jump. We don't see this very often, where energy prices spike this much in 1 month. Now, the leading theory is that this is a market response to OPEC, who many of you know are kind of one of the governing bodies in the Middle East around oil production. They've decided to start slashing their oil production even further. They started these practices earlier this year, and they're starting to accelerate the amount of production that they're slashing. Obviously, as the supply of oil goes down, the price goes up. We've talked many times on this channel about basic macroeconomic forces, and they are basically trying to manipulate the price of oil higher to earn more money, and that's clearly working. A lot of you may already start to feel this at the pump. I assure you, over the next 30 days, you're going to see a significant increase in gas prices, even beyond what we see today, because those prices tend to lag. So energy prices are rampaging out of control. that is one of the driving factors behind why the CPI is significantly higher. Right now, let's talk about what happened with the Federal Reserve today. So there was a meeting yesterday for the Federal Reserve to decide what are we going to do here. Now, the decision, there's three things that the Fed can do when it comes to interest rates. They can reduce interest rates. They can do nothing at all, which means they're pausing interest rate changes, or they can increase them again. Now, based on the press conference that Jerome Powell held today, there was never any question or any discussion amongst the board members of the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. That is not even on the table as an option. It has not been for a long time, really ever since last summer when inflation started to go out of control, and there's no immediate plans in the future to do that. So the only thing up for debate was, are we going to pause interest rate hikes for this meeting, or are we going to increase interest rates again? Those are the only two options that were on the table. So the decision that the Fed made was, as of today, there's not going to be any additional rate hikes. Jerome used the term conservative. He used that term several times throughout the press conference. He did say they're going to continue selling off securities. Now, in previous episodes, we've talked about the two main levers that the Federal Reserve pulls in order to cool inflation or to control monetary policy is they can manipulate interest rates to make it either easier or more difficult to obtain money for funding. And they also can either buy securities in order to put more money into the market and into the economy, or they can start to sell off securities, which is what they're doing now. And they're going to continue to sell off securities for the time being as a way of of further tightening their monetary policy. They're trying to suck money out of the economy to slow spending down so that inflation will come down, right? All of this is aimed at manipulating inflation. Colonel, you say you're predicting a big recession with massive layoffs in February. We're going to talk about that here towards the end of the video, because there's a lot of important events that are coming up over the next 30 to 45 days that I think is going to be a bellwether for what's going to happen with the economy. So we're going to talk about that a lot. Tashina, thank you so much for joining. Please forgive me for all the trash I talked about you at the beginning of the stream. It's going to be a rough night for Lean on Success tonight. Okay, so wanted to point out a couple of things as I watched the press conference during my lunch break today. One of the things that Powell says, we're strongly committed to this goal of 2%. Now, they've been talking about this inflation goal of 2% for a very long time. And, he's talking about this as a long-term goal. They're going to continue to monitor the situation to try to get inflation under control. I find that interesting that he's kind of sticking to his story, despite the fact that there's all these economic factors that's not going in the direction of driving prices down. We see energy prices as going to contribute to higher inflation over the coming months with OPEC restricting the oil supply. Of course, there's a lot of challenges in the housing sector where prices remain sticky and demand is drying up. We already know that the price for new cars is already kind of out of the range of affordability. Demand is drying up for those. That's potentially getting worse based on some things we're going to talk about here in a moment. So the headwinds for reducing inflation, the economy is not heading in that direction right now. And it's going to be interesting because the Fed's trying to kind of walk this tightrope of, we don't want to raise rates and put an undue amount of pressure on the banks to be unable to respond to these pressures that are happening. And although all of these things are happening that are signaling an economic downturn, the GDP numbers continue to be strong, right? So the cost of goods and services and the overall, the primary metric we use to measure whether we're in recession or whether we're in prosperous times, GDP was revised. Second quarter revision was at 2.1%, which was slightly higher than the 2% they reported when they initially released the report in July. And all indicators are really leaning towards we're going to have another positive GDP month or GDP quarter this quarter, when that report comes out next month, where everything is trending in the direction of the economy is still strong from a GDP standpoint. So that's going to be a further hike or a further green light that the Fed is going to have to hike rates. Now, he did say we got a long way to go in this process. And he did say that they updated their projections to where there will likely be another rate hike before the end of the year. And then they've increased their projections of interest rates going down by the end of next year. They still think that interest rates are going to go down a little bit lower than they are at the end of this year by the end of 2024. But they are the decrease is not as dramatic as what they once were projecting. And I would say for those of you who are following all of those projections closely, don't pay any attention to any of that. There's so much volatility right now in our economy, and nobody has a crystal ball as to what's going to happen. So, and these are unprecedented times that we're facing in our economy. We've never encountered situations like this before. The combination of economic factors we're facing, we've never faced that in this country's history. So any type of predictive models that are trying to estimate what's going to happen in 12 months, it's impossible for there to be any modicum of accuracy when it comes to those models, because these are unprecedented times. So whatever variables that are being used aren't reliable because we've never seen a situation like this before. Let's talk about the auto market. And so typically this is where I talk about prices of used cars and new cars. We're going to go a different direction today. I want to talk about the UAW strike. All right. Originally known as the United Auto Workers. I just learned this today as I was researching it. UAW actually now stands for the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America. That's a mouthful. They have begun striking against what we call the big three here in the United States. So that's Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. So Stellantis is a large group of automakers, but underneath the umbrella from an American standpoint, you have your Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Ram, those products under that maker, which we used to call Chrysler Corporation. That's now called Stellantis. That's the parent company for your Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, and Rams. So why are the workers striking? So the UAW had a collective bargaining agreement with the big three 4 years ago with a 4-year term, and that term expired last Friday on September 15th. Amongst much fanfare and a lot of bravado and tough talk from the union side, and I would say a lot of what is it called, lip service from the company side. You know, the big three are always saying, well, we don't have the money to increase wages or to meet demands around wage increases because we've invested billions of dollars in these electric vehicles that we can't sell. I put that editorial at the end there. Hey, we invested billions of dollars in this future technology. We don't have the capital to be able to give to the workers who actually built all those cars. Now, you know, I don't want to get too political in terms of taking sides with this, but I have to admit, for transparency's sake, I have multiple family members that work in the auto industry and that are members of UAW. So I am fully aware that I might be biased on the side of the union because, you know, I come from a family of union workers. And so I have a unique level of sympathy for them because I'm related to them. Right. So this strike is happening because the union and the big three couldn't come to the terms for their new collective bargaining agreement. Now, what is important to know, because there's a lot of headlines out here, it's important to understand the scope of this strike. Okay. So there are approximately 150,000 members of UAW, but only a percentage of them, less than 10% of them, are actually currently on strike. And so these are targeted strategic strikes that were planned by UAW, really as the kind of the tip of the spear from a negotiation standpoint. So there's a Ford plant in Wayne, Michigan that will shut down. There's a Stellantis plant in Toledo, and then there's a GM plant in Missouri. So these are the three plants that are currently the plants, I don't know if you want to call them shut down, but the workers at those plants are currently on strike. They walked off the job as of last Friday. Now, what's interesting is the union has already kind of put an open threat out there publicly and said, if we can't get a deal or see significant progress in negotiations by noon this Friday, which is the 22nd, they're going to increase the number of plants that they're going to be doing strikes at. Okay, so the union is playing hardball big time here. And again, I'm not faulting or judging. That's just the reality of the situation. They are prepared to expand the scope of the strike if they're not able to see progress on their demands or significant negotiations by Friday. So what are the points of contention? What are they fighting about? I'm going to summarize it into three primary categories. The first one is wage increases or raises. So UAW is saying we want to have 40%. We want the overall wages to be raised by 40% over the next 4 years. All right. Now, there are several justifications that the unions put forward for this, one of which is a 40% increase over a 4-year period is comparable to the wage increase by the top executives of the big three over the last 4 years. So basically what they're saying is increase our wages by the same rate that you've increased your salaries at the top over the last 4 years. Now, worded like that, it seems like it's pretty reasonable. I would really love if I had the opportunity to really talk to people who either work for the union or work for management at Ford, so I can kind of get both sides of the story. Because, even when media outlets are trying to be objective in reporting these things, it's almost impossible to separate your own personal bias when you're receiving this information. So, I would really love the opportunity. If any of you are management employees of one of the big three, feel free to reach out to me. Send me a message or comment. Let me know. I'd love to bring you on the show and to get your take on what's happening. If you're a UAW worker, I would love to hear from you also. So leave a comment. Let me know. And we can come. I'll invite you on the show and we can talk about these things in more detail and get, a real-time perspective from someone who's being directly impacted by these strikes. The UAW wants 40% over the next 4 years. The big three are saying we're going to offer you 20% over the next 4 years, right? That's the best we can do right now. Again, we're cash strapped because we've been investing, aka losing billions of dollars investing in EV technology. But we'll offer you 20% over 4 years. Now, the next one was inflation. So there's a contention about how we're going to deal with inflation, because obviously this has been a very unusual time frame for inflation, and at least for the UAW workers, they haven't seen an upward adjustment in their wages like most other industries have, because their wage caps are controlled by the collective bargaining agreement that they signed right before the pandemic. So what they're saying the answer to that is, in addition to the 40% wage increases over 4 years, we also want the big three to do cost of living adjustments on all of our on the wage cap to help us catch up to where inflation is as opposed to where it was 4 years ago. And so they're saying, look, give us a cost of living adjustment that's comparable to the inflation that we've seen over the last 4 years. The big three is saying, well, we recognize that your wages have been falling behind due to inflation because they've been capped for the last 4 years. We'll offer you lump sum payments that would equate to what that gap would stand at today. And that will be in addition to the 20% raises. So everybody get a 20% raise, and then we'll do lump sum payouts to help mitigate inflation. And then the last one was around benefits. And so basically, and I'm summarizing here greatly, UAW is basically saying, look, we want you to bring back the pension program that was terminated or done away with for our workers, because that's an important benefit to UAW that they want to preserve or to reinstate. And they basically want to get rid of wage tiers. So right now, the cap salary, the highest that a UAW member can be paid in these plants is $32 per hour. That is the maximum salary that they can earn. But you have to be a veteran. You have to be vested and have worked for the company and have a long tenure in order to reach that cap. If you're starting out with the company, your starting wage is much lower than that. And you move to higher tiers from a salary standpoint as you get more time under your belt with the company. UAW says get rid of all the tiers and basically shorten the gap between what the tenured employees get paid and what the newer employees get paid. That's what they're asking for. Now, what the big three are offering is, okay, look, what we'll do is we don't want to bring back the pension. We're not going to get rid of tiers. What we can do is that we can basically raise the floor for new employees. So the minimum salary or entry-level salaries, we can increase the entry-level salaries for new employees and for any temp workers that are coming in as a way of closing that gap. But we want to keep the tiers in place. So those are the current points of contention based on the data that I've read from the Associated Press as well as the New York Times. John, you left a comment about 32-hour work week is wild. I did hear a lot about that initially, right before the strike started, that was one of the negotiation points that the UAW was bringing forward. I haven't recently read, as of today, anything about them keeping that as a demand. So I'm not able to confirm whether they're still pushing for 32-hour work weeks or whether that's been taken off the table. What I can say is that the UAW president has said that the 40% over 4 years is non-negotiable. They're not going to budge until they get the 40%. And he's ready to expand the scope of the strike until they can get to that 40%. So far, based on the rhetoric that's being put out there, that seems to be the primary sticking point is those big raises. I mean, I call them big, but again, if the executives got a 40% raise over the last 4 years, it seems more than reasonable that the workers would get a raise of a similar percentage, in the ballpark. So it makes sense to me. Again, I'm biased. I have family members that work for the union. So I know that I have bias, but I'm trying to be as objective as possible as I report on these things. Now, from my perspective, when you have two parties that are negotiating terms, the party that has the most leverage almost always wins. And from my perspective, I think the OEMs might have more leverage in these negotiations. First of all, and I noticed that this was happening, but I wasn't aware of the impending strike until probably 2 weeks ago when it started to hit mainstream media. And then I realized, okay, that makes sense. We started noticing back in this late spring and the summer, the big three was just like, they just went nuts production wise. They were like basically filling up all of their new car dealerships with inventory. They're just completely flooded with inventory at a time when inflation was spiking, demand was going down, and they just got, in some cases, hundreds of vehicles in their lot that are just sitting there unsold. I think at one point earlier in the year, Ram trucks were at a 300-day supply. They have literally a year's worth of truck inventory on their lots. It's like, why do y'all pushing these production numbers out of control when you can't sell these cars? But now it makes sense because we know now that they were preparing for a strike. So they wanted to kind of prime the pump, if you will, from a supply chain standpoint and make sure they had inventory and parts on hand so that if the strike happened, they would essentially be able to ride the wave and be able to continue to sell the inventory that was already done and complete, as well as have parts availability for any existing repairs that needed to be done. So because they had months to prepare for that, I think it's possible that those OEMs may have leverage and are in a better position to kind of wait out and smoke out the union. We talked about the full car lots. The other aspect of this is the demand for cars generally follows the temperature outside. Demand starts to heat up in the spring and summer months when things get hot. and the demand for buying new cars tends to cool off in the fall and winter months, particularly December and January. So as we head deeper into fall and into the winter months, demand is going to start getting slower. Now it's already slow because nobody can afford, $100,000 Ford F-150, right? Like that's just out of the realm of possibility for most Americans. So we already see very low demand, and it's going to start to slow down even further as we get later into the year because people aren't going to be interested in buying cars, and generally this is a slower season. So that inventory that they've piled onto their dealerships is going to be able to last longer, and the days on the market or days supply is going to continue to creep up, even if the strike persists longer, because they've already stockpiled their lots. So they've got a longer runway before they start to see a downturn in inventory. And based on their behavior, it seems to me that they're more worried about the OEMs are more worried about overall decrease in customer demand due to affordability hurting them more so than a lack of supply. That seems to be their priority, is just trying to increase overall demand rather than worrying about whether the strike is going to carry on a long time. So that's what was going on right now. Good evening, Shantina. Thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate it. So I think they have leverage. Now, the report that I read in the New York Times said that the UAW, the union, has a strike reserve of about $85 million. And they estimate that will allow them, if there was a full strike, so all 150,000 workers walked off the job, that would allow them to pay those workers $500 a week for about a 3-month period. That's the runway that they're looking at. After that, I don't know what other contingencies there would be, but that's kind of the estimated runway that they would have to negotiate before the workers really started to feel pain. Now, seeing as the top paid employees within the union are getting paid $1,200 a week, that's a precipitous drop, right? Imagine that you're working at that plant in Wayne, Michigan, you're getting paid $1,000, $1,200 a week, and now you're on strike, you're only getting $500 a week. That's going to put a lot of pressure on your ability to feed your family and to be able to live, on top of the fact that everything else is already raging out of control. And there may be mixed feelings about that. I also wonder, for the current union employees who are in plants that aren't currently on strike, is there pressure or dissension within the union, between the union members, as far as who's striking and who's not, and whether certain people want the union to settle so that their plant doesn't get shut down? I don't have any insight into any of that. But again, if any of you are union workers, please reach out to me. I would love to talk to you and get some boots on the ground information about what's happening there. All right, quick update on the stock market. So we did an update at the beginning of September. So what's happening right now? The Dow Jones is down almost 1% in September, and it's up about 4% overall in 2023. So the stock market is not the biggest indicator of economic health, but it is one of the things that we look at in terms of what's happening in the economy. It is an indicator that we use, and typically stock prices are forward looking. So they are sometimes leading indicators into what Wall Street thinks is going to happen in the near future. So we see that there's been a bit of a downturn. I think that the New York Times categorized it as tepid, as a tepid market. Now, S&P 500, which is an index of the 500 largest companies in the United States, is actually down more than 2% so far this month. It's been up 16% this year, so it's been on fire up until this month. But what was interesting I noticed today was, from the time that Jerome Powell announced the rate hike to the end of the market day, the stock markets are down about 1%. So what that basically says is Wall Street is concerned about the immediate future, that Wall Street is concerned about the immediate future of the economy in response to the announcement that there's not going to be another rate hike. I know, and what I've read from a lot of outlets is there is an increasing amount of pressure from corporate America to the government to start slashing rates again, because corporate America is propped up by their ability to borrow money from banks. And the higher the rates are, the more restrictive the banks become in their ability to lend money, and the more it restricts growth in corporate America overall. So there's a lot of pressure from the corporate sector to start cutting rates, so that they have more access to revenues to grow again. So there's some opinions about that and why the markets are trending downward. Now, stock markets in general are very volatile, especially this year. So 1% decrease in 2 hours isn't something to really get overly excited or concerned about. It's really just a sign of the times of what's happening right now. I want to go back to this graph. So now that we've got a new data point, I talked last time about how you have your wages versus inflation and how fast each of these are driving. So your wages are in blue. We talked about how, prior to the pandemic and really the first year of the pandemic, wages were driving at around 3.5%, 35, 40 miles an hour. Inflation was driving, at 1%, 13, 15 miles an hour. So this is what we would call a surplus period, right? My wages are growing faster than the rate of inflation, which means that life is becoming more affordable for me. We see, though, after the last stimulus, inflation rates started to go out of control, and now we're in this deficit period, right? Now the cost of living is accelerating more quickly than my wages. So yeah, the government will tell us, hey, wages went up. Listen, you had a wage growth of 3.5%, 4% in 2020. Now you're almost 7% in 2022. Wages are going up a lot. Yeah, but inflation was going up even higher than that. So the inflation car passed the wage car, and we're just now trying to catch up, which is the surplus. But as I told y'all last time, this is fake. This is fake news, because we know that the CPI number is being artificially, as of at least until this month, the CPI number was artificially being pushed downward because the year-over-year percentages for the energy costs, which didn't fully pass on to us, was pulling it down. But now that we see this spike in the energy prices and that starting to stabilize and go positive again, this CPI number is going to continue to go up. And I'm telling you now, we are going to be higher. The CPI number is going to be even higher next month. I think I predicted 3.5% for this month. We're at 3.7. We're going over 4% for inflation next month. And it remains to be seen what wage growth is going to do. I think we're going to continue our decline in wage growth due to the number of layoffs that we already are starting to see and the contraction of the economy that's coming up over the coming months. So we're going to see this fake surplus start to stabilize, and the numbers on the reports will start to reflect what we're feeling, which is we don't feel like we're catching up, right? We're still being outpaced because these CPI numbers are somewhat artificial. Now I want to talk about something that hasn't been covered a whole lot in mainstream media up to this point. I want to talk about a potential government shutdown. Now the government has a spending bill that they release every year that gives them the authority to fund all of the programs that are sponsored by the government. So this is defense, Medicare, Social Security, any type of federal program that requires funding. Congress has to pass a bill every year to approve spending money on those programs. Well, the current agreement for federal funding ends at the end of this month, midnight on September 30th, which is next Saturday, right? Now, if the government doesn't pass legislation, Congress specifically, if Congress doesn't pass legislation to approve a new spending bill or to at least extend the agreement on the current bill, we're going to go through a government shutdown. All right. Now, I'm going to have your friendly neighborhood federal accountant, Scott Barber. He's going to join us next week to talk a little bit about what all the repercussions of that potentially would be from a shutdown perspective and what we can expect if the government tends to shut down. Now, based on all the reports that I've read earlier today, it's going to be an uphill climb for Speaker McCarthy to be able to rally the troops as it relates to a bill, because there is a ton of infighting amongst the Republican Party in terms of what to do as far as a spending bill. There's a huge lack of agreement. And I know that that's the case because I read that in both the Associated Press and in Fox News. So if Fox News is telling you the Republicans are fighting, the Republicans are fighting. All right. So it's an uphill climb. Remains to be seen how that's going to play out. But on the trajectory we're at now, we're headed towards shutdown. We'll talk about the impacts of that here in a minute. All right. So in conclusion, let's kind of put a bow on all of this. So we talked about, hey, CPI is spiking upward. Inflation is not under control. We're moving in the direction of 4% or more in the next report. It'll be interesting to see what happens and how the Fed's going to respond to that. We talked about how the Fed is currently holding, right? But they are projecting another rate hike before Christmas. I would say that is almost a certainty based on where I see inflation going over the next month or two. They're not going to have any choice but to admit that the inflation numbers are not trending downward to their long-term goal, and they're going to have to do more tightening in order to get it back under control. The auto strike, again, there's been a deadline of noon Friday to make progress on negotiations. They're going to expand. So right now, the trajectory we're going, there's going to be additional plants being shut down due to strikes. Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see how the union is going to manage that and what the rate of acceleration of the strike is going to be. Stock markets are cooling off. I showed all of you their overall, the Dow Jones as well as the S&P. They're down for the month so far. They dropped significantly today due to the news that the Fed released. And I expect that the markets are going to continue to cool down, especially as the strike worsens, and if there's a shutdown, I definitely anticipate there's going to be a significant decline in the stock market. We're going to see some downturns there. We talked about the government shutdown is looming, and that obviously is something that is going to affect all the variables that we talked about here today. Now, we talked about this in my last update. I talked about how we have this powder keg that's kind of looming, right? People can't afford their lifestyle, so they borrow more money so that they can spend more money. As they spend more money, inflation rises, which is what we're seeing. Inflation rises, Fed raises rates. They didn't raise rates today, but they are going to raise rates at least once again this year. That means that loans are going to be more expensive, which means that people who took out their loans won't be able to afford it, and they follow this cycle. And then, as the nursery rhyme says, when the bough breaks, the baby will fall. So as people run out of options and no longer are able to borrow more money to keep up with the lifestyle, we're going to start seeing defaults go up. As people start to default on their loans, corporate profits are going to fall. That's going to trigger even more layoffs than what we're currently seeing. The unemployment rate goes back up, and now people who are unemployed can't afford their lifestyle. Right now, one of the matches we talked about was student loans. I said that's student loan repayments are restarting in October. That's going to be a significant factor, and we'll have to watch very closely to see what kind of impact those loans are going to have on the overall situation. But I think there's another option here based on what we just learned today. I think this strike could potentially be another match that causes this powder keg to explode. If 150,000 people losing their jobs all at once, that's going to have a significant impact on the economy, because that's income and money that's just being taken out of the system, and people aren't going to be able to continue down this path, right? And then the government shutdown. You think about the millions of people who are employed by the government. If the government shuts down and they're no longer getting paid, imagine that's going to further exacerbate the spending that's going on here. So these are a lot of matches. This situation is very tense, and it's important that we watch all of these things very closely because this is our economy is in a delicate situation right now, and there's a lot of headwinds in the way that are preventing us from being able to get out of this death spiral. I think it's only going to get worse. Colonel, you talk about student loans will be the match. I completely agree. And there's already surveys. I was watching a report today. I think 60 something % of people said they're not going to pay their student loans. And there's even talk from people about boycotting their student loans. Let's rise up and unify to not pay the government back. My advice to all of you, I'm not a financial advisor. My advice all to you is don't F with Uncle Sam. Okay. You don't want that smoke. You do not want the smoke of the government coming after you. Just so y'all are aware, student loans are not bankruptable. So you can't file bankruptcy and just erase them out of your life. They're with you until death or permanent disability. That's the only way for you to get rid of student loans. Biden's forgiveness program has pretty essentially been shelved. I don't see that gaining any additional traction. So do not mess with the government. Pay your loans, negotiate, get payment plans, do what you need to do, but do not ignore your student loans and do not default. You're asking for trouble, and you're going to dig a hole that you won't be able to get out of. So no, Tashina, boycotting student loans is not an option. Don't do it. Pay your loans, girl. Pay your loans. All right, so wanted to give y'all some dates to watch here. These are things we need to look out for in the future. So we talked about noon Friday, the 22nd. The strike is set to expand based upon the current rhetoric. I'm just calling it an outright threat from the UAW president. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if they're not able to reach agreement by noon Friday. That's an important date to watch. Again, the spending bill for the government ends or expires Saturday, September 30th. So next Saturday is kind of the deadline for Congress to get a new deal in place, or to extend the current bill so that they can work on a new deal. Otherwise, we're facing a government shutdown next Sunday. The next jobs report is going to come out October 6th. Now, what's going to be important is that jobs data is based off of surveys that are lagging by a month or more. So even if there are extensive strikes or a government shutdown, whatever job losses that happen as a result of that won't show up in that jobs report. So if one or both of those things occur and the jobs report numbers come out, we know that whatever unemployment rate is reported is actually higher in real time, because those job losses will have happened too soon to the deadline for the report for them to show up. If those things happen, we're not going to see the impact until the October jobs report that's released in November. So it's important for us to keep in mind, don't be fooled if the jobs report says that unemployment is stable, because if there's an expanded strike, I assure you there's way more unemployed people than what's going to show on the report. That's very important to remember. I'm going to remember that. The next inflation report comes out October 12th. So we'll be looking out for that. And then the next GDP report for third quarter is released on the 26th. And then the Fed is going to meet again November 1st. I think that it's a very high likelihood that, unless GDP is just out the box higher than expected, or unemployment reverses, which I don't think that's going to happen. There's no way the Fed isn't going to raise rates again in November, because inflation is going the wrong way. Inflation will not go down. That report will be higher. It's going to be 4% plus. And the jobs report, I expect unemployment to be the same or higher than it was last month. So unemployment staying the same or higher, CPI going higher, the Fed's hands are going to be tied. They're not going to have any choice but to raise rates to try to cool the economy down, because it is still way too hot despite all these things that we're seeing. Like I said, these are strange times. These are unprecedented times. we did go through something similar to this in the late 70s, early 80s. It's called stagflation, where prices were spiking out of control, but the economy was basically, we were basically in recession, even though inflation was spiking out of control. The economy was in recession. That's known as stagflation. So we went through something similar to this in the late 70s, early 80s. But what really helped us get out of it, and I talked about this in a previous video, was women started to enter the workplace in masses. And so the participation rate, or the number of available laborers to work jobs, increased significantly. And that's what help pull us out of the recession, was the expansion that the economy was able to do, because you had a larger labor force that was able to grow corporations more quickly. We don't have a large cohort of adults that are going to just rush back into the workforce and save us this time. There's not going to be stimulus that's going to save us this time. All the levers that we've pulled in the past to help us navigate through these things, those things aren't available to us anymore. Now, in the near future, I'm going to be talking about some specific things that my family's doing to kind of recession-proof our lives and our finances. Again, not a financial advisor, but I wanted to give you insight into things that we've discussed on this show as best practices from a financial stability standpoint that we're actively employing, so that we are prepared for any type of economic downturn, and we'll be able to weather it on the backside. So, just catching up on comments here. Colonel said holiday sales will be a record low. Everyone's broke. Yeah, I agree. I predicted that months ago. It's going to be a Charlie Brown Christmas. It's going to be a Charlie Brown Christmas for a lot of people, because the debt determination that I've been talking about, people are just going to run out of opportunities to borrow. Is just going to become too much. It's going to become crushing, and I am concerned about people who aren't adequately prepared and aren't stable financially and are using debt as a means to get by. I don't judge them, because I've been there, I've lived that life, but it's only going to get more difficult for people who are over leveraged or overly dependent on debt in order to maintain their lifestyles. There's going to be some hard choices that will be made, because ain't no stimmies coming for us anymore. That ship has sailed. So again, I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you to all of you who joined. I think this is a record number of comments I've had on a live stream. Thank y'all so much for supporting the show. I really appreciate everything that y'all have done. Again, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, help me monetize, because my wife is expensive. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody. Until next time, I'll see y'all next